Hey everyone, Claire Fluffle here, and I'm not gonna waste any time. Toss this video. Yes, Wing just has a move named Toss. It's weird. Toss this video a like. Let me know in the comments which ability you would like to see in the next Copy Ability Spotlight. Voting ends May 15th, 2023. And dive bomb my subscriptions by ringing that notification bell after subscribing. You'll be notified as soon as I upload, which is very nice. If you would like even more of an impact on the spotlights, check out my Patreon page, link below in the description. Thanks an absolute ton, and let's flap on over to one heck of a spotlight. You know, when I actually started this whole spotlight series on speedrunning, I figured Wing would be one of the first abilities that we covered. I understood that more fan-favorite abilities would get the favoritism, even if most of the fan favorites didn't wind up being covered very early on either. But now that we're nearing the 30th spotlight, we're finally covering one of the abilities that I never stop talking about. That ability, of course, is Wing. The length of this video may not be as long as you would expect. I mean, Fire is probably the longest that these videos are ever going to get, but all that means is that Wing isn't in a lot of games. Was it actually good, or am I just hyping this up for no reason? Because, I do have a tendency of doing that. Maybe Wing isn't actually all that good, now that I'm saying it like that. It could be very real. Oh my goodness, was Wing bad this whole time? Let's find out. We recently covered Wheel for a spotlight, so Kirby Air Ride shouldn't take too long to explain. If you haven't seen the Wheel spotlight, check it out please, more views equals better reviews, but the long and short of it is that both Wheel and Wing function completely differently from the regular vehicles, or stars. If you're looking for consistency, you're probably better sticking off with a star, since they aren't temporary. However, Wheel has some really nice advantages, like great boosting, a constant hitbox to hit enemies with, and most importantly, a consistently good speed. Wing, on the other hand, has good flight. That's about it. The speed on Wing is actually, okay too, but a big part of Kirby Air Ride is not maintaining your speed, it's boosting it, which is why Wheel is still actually pretty good. Hitting a boost pad with Wheel gets you a big burst, plus ramming into enemies doesn't slow you down. Wing has to do the spinny spin to hurt enemies, which inherently slows you down a little bit, and while it's not the worst, you do have to wonder why the heck you just not go for it compared to any other ability. Yeah, the big thing with both Wheel and Wing is that they're not the only abilities in Air Ride. They're both better than something like Sleep, but compared to stuff like Sword and Needle, or heck, even abilities that aren't that great like Fire and Ice, Wheel can hold its own, but I really can't say the same about Wing. Even in all tracks, all vehicles, the perfect excuse to use Wing instead of a garbage star or something, other abilities that boost speed wind up being used instead. And don't get me wrong, Wing is usable, it even gets used on some rare occasions, but good is not something that I would use to describe it in this game. Oh, and while I like to focus on Air Ride when talking about Air Ride, that sentence makes sense if you've actually played the game, trust me! Abilities aren't in Top Ride, and they don't play much of a role in City Trial. Typically, the items that you find in green boxes, like Gordos for example, matter more for City Trial stuff compared to abilities. But Wing could potentially be very good if they were. The City Trial has inherent stat boosters that fix issues like your speed, and Wing works much better in open areas compared to Wheel, which can be a bit tricky to maneuver with. Unfortunately, that's not the reality that we live in. Wing and City Trial is basically useless, but hey, it's nice to dream sometimes. That being said though, it isn't all bad for abilities in City Trial. Some very easy checklist accomplishments to unlock for any City Trial category are the ability roulette wheel ones. Simply get an ability from that little mix wheel on that one building tower thing and you're good. This only applies to two abilities though, and they're Bomb and Sleep? Wow, wait a minute. You're telling me unironically that Sleep is used more in City Trial speedrunning than Wing. Let that sink in for a bit, why don't you? Wow, a Return to Dreamland era game with Wing in it is this low on the list? See, Wing and Kirby's Dream Collection isn't bad. In fact, it's really good. Equal in every way to how it is in Return to Dreamland even. With one crucial exception. Dream Collection is not traditional in how you can pick and choose your abilities. No, it opts to be all challenge stages start to finish, meaning you only get Wing for a small handful of the game. We need more games that do things like this, by the way. I love when it's like this, especially with the challenge stages. Why they ditch these as soon as they introduce them, I don't get it. But what matters is that wing can only be used in 4 stages. The wing challenge stage, wow, go figure. Thank you, smart puppy, for your wisdom. You're welcome. And Magolor Races 2, 3, and EX. For Magolor Race 2, there is no question. You use wing and you zoom through the stage. Despite not being very long, you still manage to save well over 7 seconds compared to the other abilities that you can use for that race, Fighter and Whip, when going for Platinum. For any percent, it's still comparable, since you can just ignore those coins and zoom on by even faster. Point is, it's much better. For Races 3 and EX, though, well, okay, it's still the best, but interestingly, it kind of shares the center stage with Parasol. See, Wing doesn't even save 2 full seconds over it, and parts of the races are legitimately faster with Parasol than with Wing. And I'm not trying to say that Parasol is better than Wing in this game necessarily, although it comes really close, and quite frankly, it doesn't really matter, which is kind of what the problem is. And that's not my bias speaking either. Okay, mostly it isn't my bias. I love Parasol too much. I should seek help. I won't. Anyway, aside from the second race and the level that you have to use it in, which is not something I like to give credit for in these spotlights, Wing isn't that much better than its good competition. This is the main disadvantage of making the game challenge stages only. Because every stage is so short, you really need to push your advantage, so to speak. You could realistically opt for Parasol or Wing or even something like Smash, and it wouldn't change much regarding world records or personal bests and such. Wing is the best choice. It's still the best ability in the game. We're just so early on in the video, I have to make it sound underwhelming somehow. But the format of the game is too limited. You're really not going to lose too much with Wing compared to something, like I said before, like Parasol or Smash. That, in combination with just the horrendous availability, is why it's all the way down here. The bulk of why this video took so long was deciding the placements for number 7 through number 4. The placement for Wing and Superstar specifically took me a long time to figure out. Depending on the category, it ranges from completely useless to absolutely mandatory. Not to mention, it can be seen both as better and worse than it is in Ultra. And on top of that, at a glance, it definitely seems better than in the Dream Collection, which I already talked about. I better be getting paid overtime for that. So where the heck do I place it? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm confident in my own rankings. What kind of video would this be if I wasn't? But the question was still a really hard one to answer. So I guess the easiest way to answer that is by finding out what makes Wing and the original KSS stand out. For starters, a technique that exists in pretty much every game other than Air Ride is the dive bomb cancel. Now, what the heck is a dive bomb cancel, you may be wondering? Why, I will show and tell you. I'm so nice. Anyway, a dive bomb is a move with Wing that you can perform by pressing down and B while in the air. Kirby does a little flip before diving onto the ground face first. It's gotta hurt. It's pretty neat, but what makes this move especially great is that, at any point, you can cancel it with a jump. And for the Superstar games, at least, I mean literally any point. You can get insane vertical speeds if you can time it right. While future games don't let you do it literally immediately, they also buff the speed in which Wing's regular wing flaps move Kirby, so it isn't quite as necessary. Still, no ability in either Superstar game can match this kind of vertical speed. High jump maybe could have, but it doesn't exist here. Jet cannot compare. And even abilities that use vertical wall clips like Ninja or something, they don't necessarily move fast. Wing dominates in this regard. You mostly see Dive Bomb Cancel be used in Great Cave Offensive 100%, but we'll explain that a little later. Dive Bomb Cancel is great, but depending on the mode, the regular wing flaps can also get the job done okay too. And by that, I mean in Gourmet Race, Wing is ridiculous. The physics and speed of Gourmet Race in the original KSS are really weird, but this benefits Wing to an insane degree. No other ability in KSS Gourmet Race is good in any way, shape, or form because of how strong Wing is. Dive Bomb Cancel is an amazing vertical tool, but the wing flap not only breaks star blocks, but just look at how quickly it can move horizontally. That's crazy! Who thought this was okay? They deserve a raise. Trust me, I'm asking this question as rhetorically as I can, in the nicest way that I can. I really like taking brief pauses for the sake of a joke, so let's move on. Now, all of this sounds well and good, but there's just one teeny tiny problem here. Great vertical movement and gourmet race are basically all that Wing has going for it. It's okay for boss fights, but not great. It's used for a boss in GCO Hundo, I guess. It's more than I could say for a lot of abilities, but it's more so out of necessity than anything else. But for horizontal movement, it isn't quite as bad, and is definitely better than just running normally, but unlike later games, it has some nasty end lag to it that makes it really weird to use. Movement options are not sparse in KSS, and abilities like Wheel, Jet, and even lesser overall abilities like Parasol or something have comparable, if not better, horizontal movement. This is why it only really sees use in GCO Hundo and Gourmet Race. Just about every other game mode has levels that focus on moving horizontally. If Wing was in a game like Adventure with a lot of vertical set pieces, it would still certainly have competition, like High Jump, but it would have fared a lot better. All of Wing's tech ultimately just amounts to moves up fast, which is not what you want in Superstar. You want jank, like fully charged plasma in 4 frames, so you can attack bosses quick, or jet phases through ability pedestals so you can just zoom through them and not lose your ability. Or, again, Ninja can clip through walls and save you literal minutes by skipping a puzzle. That's why it's ranked so low, even if it's very comparable to our next game. The funny thing about Wing in Superstar Ultra is that, on paper at least, it's exactly the same as in the original Superstar. Basically, it's used for all of the same game modes and for largely the same reasons. It zooms through Gourmet Race Course 3, Dive Bomb Cancel is great for moving up, the dash attack has so much end lag that using it horizontally can be a little weird and make you cry, etc. On the bright side, this means I don't have as much explaining to do. I do still love it when my job is easy. But what makes Wing better in Ultra compared to the original? The answer is so complicated that it may make me faint, but hear me out. Let's start with Gourmet Race. Wing can actually clear it faster in Ultra thanks to the physics and controls being improved. It still has that insane momentum, but it's a lot less stiff, allowing for many improvements to the movement. Wing has the best time, but unlike the original, other abilities also have really good times too. Ironically enough, Jet and Wheel are only okay, and really not in the conversation at all, but Ninja's time is pretty respectable. I definitely recommend checking out a Ninja run. It's got a good time. More importantly though, Parasol is only a second or two behind Wing. I know Parasol, I can talk about Parasol, I'm so happy. While the reasoning for these abilities being better, they can be saved for their own spotlights, the question, of course, raises itself. Wing was easily the best in the original, but here, it's got some competition. But the final time that it gets is still better than in the original. So is it better since it's, well, better, or worse due to other abilities making it seem less good? I'm going with the former since even with the stronger competition, it still does have the fastest time, but it being less dominant definitely stings, especially when Parasol is right there. There's not much to say for Wing in the other modes though. For GCO Hundo, its usage in Area 1, the subtree, is nearly identical. For the old tower, it's wildly different, but also the exact same. If that makes any sense, I'm going crazy. Oh, I just fainted, oof. If anything, I'd give it a slight edge in the original since it's used for a boss, but Wing is used for more chests in Ultra, especially if you count the use of the helpers. So maybe I would actually give it the edge in Ultra? I don't know, really it doesn't matter since it's great in both versions and that's all you need to hear. I didn't cover Milky Way Wishes earlier, but I guess to do it really quick, it's never seen in either any percent, and for Hundo, in the original, you literally get rid of it as soon as you get it. But in Ultra, you can get rid of it if you want to, you never actually use it, but if you want to keep it until you get to Krakow, go for it. So technically it's better in Ultra? Yay? Okay, so we mentioned bosses and helpers earlier, so let's detail Bird On in Helper to Hero. It's not great. If you're listening to the video, you may be waiting to hear what I have to say with bated breath, but if you're watching the video, you may not think it's that bad looking at the footage. Sure, it's no bonkers. Bonkers is bonk, but this looks pretty solid. And the reason it does is because I'm cheeky and using footage of a TAS. Burn On is like Plasma and how its TAS time is far better than the regular time. For TAS, Wing has the currently documented 8th best time. Not bad. but the required precision and speed for the inputs here are far too demanding and unrealistic for an actual person to do. Sadly, this translates to Birdon having the second worst time of any ability for non-task helper to hero. Dive Bomb is its best option, and it's just too weak or slow, depending on how you want to look at it, compared to the competition. It isn't all bad. Some bosses like Wispy are effectively the same regardless of if you're doing pass or not, but most fights simply take way too long compared to the competition. So, again, the question arises, how do we compare this to Superstar? Heck, even the Dream Collection. Here, it's Superstar, but technically better while also being kinda worse, with a boss rush time that's actually documented, which is more than I could say for the original, but it's still not very good, and it has actual availability, unlike the Dream Collection, which means you can actually get good usage for it. I don't know, it's so hard, but I'm gonna put it above those two and stick to my guns of technically it's better, so that's good enough for me. In many of these games, as flawed as Wing is, it's still really good for one or two things, and hey, that's all that really matters, right? So here is yet another one where talking about Wing's quality is not easy. With that being said, aside from Air Ride, Wing and Triple Deluxe is easily the most straightforward so far. Still not easy, but I can actually explain it in a way that's going to make sense. So let's make it more complicated and talk about the True Arena first. Wing is an excellent choice for the boss fights with a top 6 time for clearing the whole thing. But how did it get so much better from the Superstar games? If it isn't using Dive Bomb, then what is it using? It's using Dive Bomb. Unlike the Superstar games, Dive Bomb has crazy invulnerability on it, allowing you to use Dive Bomb Cancel not as a movement option, but as a boss killing option. It's really neat and technically advanced. We'll be seeing a lot more of this later. I don't want to show off too much of it for now, but all I'll say is that it's really strong, and in Triple Deluxe, a game where abilities were specifically made weaker, it's really good. I wouldn't say that this is Wing's best game for the True Arena, but you could argue that point. I'll get more into that later. Now, for the actual story mode. Bad news, for any percent, it is practically useless. You use it to move up in one whole level. Wowie, wowie, zowie. Otherwise, it has one major issue holding it back. 2, I guess, and that's terrible availability. Mixing is a non-factor for Triple Deluxe, so abilities actually have to be around in order to be useful, and Wing isn't really around much. It doesn't help that the other major problem is Fire. Fire in Triple Deluxe is the best ability in the game, definitely better than Wing even, and that's a very common ability to get. It even has a mini-boss as if it needed any extra help in the availability department. Oh. And while it's used for an extra couple of levels, it is the same story for all Sunstones, the category where you get all Sunstones. I figured I needed to clarify just in case, but whatever. And this is where 100% comes in, and frankly, this may be the funniest thing that I have talked about in a spotlight so far. While it's largely the same story as Any Percent and ASS, don't think too hard about that one, there's one major difference. See, the difference between getting Sunstoned and going O for Hundo is that 100% truly means 100%. Clear drum dash, do fighters, zoom through the arena modes, all that jazz, on top of getting everything in the main story. And that includes Sunstones, clearing the extra stages, and getting keychains. If you don't know, keychains are collectibles that you can find in every level. Aside from rare keychains, there's only one of those in every level, these are entirely random. And yes, you can get duplicates. This may not sound so bad, but including the rare keychains, there are 256 of these darn things. So what's a speedrunner to do? Well, the generally accepted method is to clear the main game, do some cleanup, and zoom through the other modes, and whenever you're comfortable, grind for the leftover keychains. The best level to do that in is 4-2, a quick level with a good amount of keychains, open space to use a dash attack, vertical movement both up and down, and a certain ability that we've been talking a lot about. Which ability? That's right, Parasol! You use Parasol for a good chunk of the level due to how quickly it can zoom through, but later on in that level you actually do run into Wing, and you use that instead, including on your repeat visits to the level. In the grand scheme of things, it is a pretty minor part of the run, and all it really amounts to is unlocking keychains, but it takes up well over an hour of the run. And while that may sound awful if you've never played this game before, if you have 100%ed it, you'll realize how little time that actually is. So here we are again. It's used for less things than in Superstar, Superstar Ultra, and maybe even the Dream Collection, depending on how you want to look at it. When it is used, it's really, really good. It is barely used for any percent in all Sunstones, but it crushes boss fights, and Triple Deluxe 100% is one of the longest Kirby speedrunning categories ever. I definitely think the good is enough to merit placing it this high, although I still wouldn't say that Wing is overall that much better here than in the previous 3 games. It's definitely much better than it is in Air Ride though, don't worry about that. The big perk here is that for what you're using it for, it actually is amazing. And unlike in the Dream Collection, it saves a lot of time compared to the competition. So overall, yeah, I would say Wing and Triple Deluxe is very good. Great even. But I figure you may be disappointed if you were this far into the video and expecting something on the level of Fire or even Jet or Cutter when you've heard about how I've talked about Wing in previous spotlights. Oh, deep breaths everybody. Here we go. Alright, real quick, let's get the negatives out of the way. They do exist. First, for guest star allies, it isn't a Dream Friend, which means it has a worse time than all of the Dream Friends. Discounting the Dream Friends, it definitely fares better, but we'll get into that when we're done with the negatives. For the ultimate choice, again, Dream Friends exist, but for solo runs, it's fine. Not bad, but fine. Solo runs really don't matter. You would think that the Bluster element would be a big deal, because, you know, air bomb spam. But again, Dream Friends. And speaking of Dream Friends, it is wholly inferior to Sizzle, Shuttle Loot, Meta Knight. Meta Knight has wings flapping, so vertical movement winds up being the same, so there's literally no reason to use it once you unlock Meta Knight. This is the case with every ability in the game, though, and even other Dream Friends that can technically be better than Meta Knight. You need to go to a Dream Fountain for them, which wastes time, unlike Meta Knight. And finally, as a segue into the good, it does show up in Heroes in Another Dimension. It's not a big deal since you're forced to use it and all, plus you're stuck using the Friend Star for most of it, but you use the dash attack at least once, so something. Okay, now to talk about the good. Any percent, 100%, guest star allies, no piggybacking, whatever. If you can use Wing and Dream Friends don't steal the show, you should be using Wing. No questions asked. Even for the ultimate choice, if Dream Friends weren't allowed, yeah, you'd be playing as Poppy Brothers, but Air Bomb Spam would still be the way to go. And Wing is by all means the best ability to provide the Bluster element with. Wing and Star allies would likely be the best version of this ability if it weren't for the insane power creep that Dream Friends brought to the table. Think about that. But when you really look at Wing and Star allies, all of the pieces fit into place. Condor Head, the dash attack we'll be talking about soon enough, is insane and is probably, on paper at least, at its best. It's ranked 13th for horizontal movement out of every single move in the game, and unlike everything above it, it's either completely free and doesn't require an element or something, or is not a Dream Friend that you have to unlock. Dive Bomb canceling, the boss rush thing we were talking about in Triple Deluxe, is still a great tool to beat the bosses with. Combo Dive, done by pressing up and then down in B, or pressing down in B during Condor Head, the dash attack, is arguably the best attack for downward movement in the entire game. Wing simply has the best combination of movement of all kinds, boss killing, and availability in the whole thing. Sure, Meta Knight outclasses Wing in just about every way, but you don't unlock Meta Knight until after you've cleared World 2. Even if we're talking any percent, that's 9 whole levels that you have to clear. So what are you going to use in the meantime? Adoy Wing. This applies for every category under the sun for the story mode. You don't even have to worry about getting rid of it for puzzles, since you've got your CPU helper friends that can do puzzle solving work for you. Just keep Wing, zoom through the levels, maybe piggyback on Poppy Bros for some boss killing, rinse repeat. Very simple, very comfortable. The only real downside to this is that Parasol can't keep up this randomly hilarious streak of being in competition with Wing that it's had for this whole video. Wait a second! For 100% categories, you gotta get Parasol Waddle Dee for this one puzzle! That's really not comparable at all to what we've been talking about, but I'll take what I can get! keep that strange trend alive. Lastly, for guest star allies, you know, I've actually explained everything that I could explain so far. A dash attack good, other moves also good. Whoops. Other abilities like Ice also have really good times, but unlike previous entries, nothing compares with what Wing has, so it doesn't have to worry quite as much about the competition. Wing is definitely much better in Star Allies compared to any of the games that we've talked about prior, but would you believe me if I said that things were about to get even better? Yeah, of course you would. If you watched a Spotlight before, you already know what's coming. I think a lot about what the best ability of all time is. Not overall, we already know that's fire, but which ability in which game is the single best out of all of them? Jet in the Superstar games, Wheel and Squeak Squad, Tornado and Adventure. It's a tough call, but an ability that absolutely should be in the running is Wing from Return to Dreamland. You may be surprised to see that it's only number 2, but trust me, when we get to number 1, it'll make sense. But for now, what makes Wing and Return to Dreamland so good? Well, unfortunately for you guys, I've already explained it. Everything that makes Wing so good in Star Allies is the same here, with a couple of differences. Those differences, for the most part, have very little to do with Wing, but rather the game itself. Return to Dreamland levels not only have a lot more going on in them, they're also much smaller and condensed. Star Allies has a lot of wide open areas with a lot of nothing going on, but in return, enemies and obstacles are placed in a way where you either need to deal with them to be efficient, or you need to be good at going past them to be efficient. Wing is perfect for these kinds of levels and dominates this game with ease. Specifically for any percent, Wing is one of the only abilities used for the entire run. You get Fire early on to move through a room and maybe 2 rooms quicker, and you get Ninja at the very end for 2 whole boss fights, and that's it. For over 85 minutes of a 95-minute run, you use Wing to move through this game with ease. If you're one of the cool people who watches these videos, the footage in the back can help display my points. If you're still listening, don't worry, I still love you for watching, thank you. Now, 100% does shift the scales a bit. Wing is still pretty dominant, but it has much more competition. For one-player hundo, the category as a whole is insanely varied, with nearly every ability seeing some kind of usage. The forerunners are the movement-based abilities like Fire, Tornado, High Jump, Parasol, you just know I had to bring up that one, and of course, Wing. Fire actually winds up seeing the most use, which is really impressive considering how good Wing is, but runners have been theory crafting some extra mixes into the routing, which would probably put Wing back on top. For now, it's second to Fire, but either way, both are excellent and the clear-cut winners of the category. Two-player hundo, on the other hand, trades variety for some of the most insane strategies you'll ever see in a Kirby game. I actually made a video detailing the history of two-player hundo's development, which you can watch by clicking the clicky thing. Unless you're watching this on my Patreon, there is no clicky thing. Sorry, guys. But the relevant factor here is that Wing is largely unaffected. One player is so varied because you would need to route around ditching your movement abilities for more niche ones, and with multiplayer strats, you just don't have to worry about that as much. Yes, Wing became even better thanks to two-player hundo. You may pretend to act shocked now. The only real downside that Wing really has in Return to Dreamland is the arena modes, but even then, it's not much of a downside, it's just not as much of an upside. In fact, if we look at the true arena, Wing actually ranks top 10, a feat arguably more impressive, I would argue anyway, than Triple Deluxe's top 6 ranking. Unlike Triple Deluxe, return abilities are almost all really good. It ranks above some seriously good competition like Whip, Fire, and Leaf, and just barely loses to the likes of really powerful abilities like Cutter, Bomb, and... Oh, let's go! Parasol again! I swear, I'm not bringing up Parasol this much because it's my favorite ability. I said already it is my favorite ability, but I'm telling you the facts in a hopefully entertaining way. It's so funny to me. And trust me, we're not going to be talking about Parasol in the next game. So enjoy it while it lasts. Anyway, the actual how-to of how Wing works for the boss rush is, again, like how it is in Triple Deluxe. Return bosses don't punish you nearly as hard for being weak, and again, return abilities mostly aren't weak, so the competition is far more legitimate. And with that, Wing still pulls off impressive feats. A 10th place ranking seems less impressive than a 6th place one, but again, because of the actual details, I would argue that Wing is better here. It just do be like that sometimes. With all of this out of the way, the question again raises itself. I literally said earlier that Return to Dreamland Wing maybe could have been good enough to be the best ability in any Kirby game, so how is it only number 2? Well, it's funny that I worded the question like that. See, I'm smart, I'm thinking ahead. It is number 1. It technically, yeah, I'm sure you've already seen this coming. You already know the answer. Let's just get it out of the way. Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe is a very different game from the original in many ways. The big one for me, as both a filthy casual and a speedrunning snob, was the change to mixing. In the original, you needed to inhale 3 different enemies, and once you did, the actual mix roulette order was completely random. Here, you only need to inhale 2 enemies as long as the abilities they give are different, and the mix roulette order is no longer random. Meaning, you can very easily wing mix in the very first room of the game, rather than the middle of the 3rd room, and use wing for all of the same shenanigans you originally would. On top of that, due to some changes to boss health and ninja kinda being nerfed, you use wing for the final 2 boss fights that I mentioned before. You literally get wing and never get rid of it. There are still a couple of things to note about Return Deluxe though. For starters, the any percent time is actually still longer than the original. But that has nothing to do with Wing. It's all in the load time, so if you're waiting for me to say something like, Wing is better in Return Deluxe, which is why it's better in Return Original, I'm sorry, it's not gonna happen. The astute viewer may also be thinking that you can get Wing easier thanks to souvenir items, and yes, you are correct, absolutely correct actually. There's just one thing. You get souvenir items from Merry Magoland, which is nothing more than a waste of time in most categories. For Kirby Master and Extra Mode 100%, you can go to Merry Magoland either during the run or prior to starting it, respectively, so you could still get them there. Neither of these categories are super detailed with the routing beyond what we know from the original game, though, so it's unclear just how much it helps Wing. It definitely helps Wing, just again, we don't know how much. One final thing to comment on before wrapping up, the meta for the True Arena is very, very, very different. There's a lot of conflicting information regarding what abilities got nerfed and how much extra health do bosses have right now. I don't want to promise exact specifics. The game's been out for a while, but we're still trying to find out what's true and what's fake. But from what I've been told from very legitimate sources, bosses have slightly more health, and yes, some abilities were nerfed, including Ninja, which was one of the best abilities in the game. This, as well as the inclusion of new boss fights, many of which take place in the air, absolutely changed the viability ranking for abilities. And while we don't have exacts for everything, Wing's current best time that I could find video proof of was 14:33:53. And, pretend to act surprised again, it's doing the same thing it always has. Dive bomb canceling is really good. At the end of the day, Wing simply has more to do in Return Deluxe compared to the original. And in the modes that it has things to do in, it technically does more better compared to the original. That just made my head spin. Both versions are 2 of the best abilities in the whole series, no questions asked, but it really is impossible to argue that it's better in the original. Well, for now anyway. If any developments show up that would make Wing less powerful in Deluxe, then the original version would come back out on top. But you can argue that with literally anything, so whatever. Is that it? Are we done? Okay, we're finally done. With everything ranked and rambled, it comes time for the age-old question we pontificate at the end of every single spotlight. Was Wing any good? You don't need a functioning brain to know the answer, it's fantastic, but just how fantastic may or may not be the answer you'd expect. I talk about Wing so much in Return to Dreamland for these spotlights that it's easy to assume it would just be the best ability in Kirby history. Move on, thanks for watching, like, subscribe, give me money. And while it may be the best in that specific game, as well as its remake, it's not quite the same when speaking more broadly. Wing only appears in 8 games, and even then, it's pretty bad in Air Ride, honestly. Abilities with fewer appearances like Jet don't really have to worry about being bad ever. And abilities like Fire and Cutter, yeah, they may have a few duds, but they're legitimately really good in more games than Wing is even in. Now, Wing has a track record of being good in 7 out of the 8 games, which is really good, and absolutely amazing in 3 of them. Those numbers are nothing to sneeze at, and I don't think anyone who knows their stuff would argue that Wing is anything less than a top 5 best ability. But I don't think it's the best. I need to seriously sit down and rank these suckers one of these days, but if you had to ask me right now, in the moment, without thinking, I would say it's number 2, with Fire being number 1. Okay, with that, we are done. Thank you so much for watching. I know this has been a highly anticipated video for a very, very long time, so I thank you again for sticking around until the end, and I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to vote for the next ability in the comments down below. Again, I'll be taking votes until May 15th, 2023, so vote away! And if you're watching this on Patreon, a double thank you for the support, with special thanks going to Biohazard and Dips Fiora for being head-patting Fluffle fan patrons. One final thank you again to everybody watching, and until next time, I've been Claire, and I will see you around. Bye-bye!